Well, hello, everyone. I'm Steve Martin. I'm here with Clyde Pilkington. Today's freedom journey, we want to talk about the freedom to not go to church. And I don't know, Clyde, you probably haven't been to church in 20 or 30 years.
30 years. Yeah.
30 years. My wife and I quit church. Well, when COVID came, of course, there wasn't any church. And then when that got released, we never went back. So that's been close. It'll soon be 6 years from that. And so for me, the main reason why I quit going to church is that when I would hear the preachers talk about a God who is vengeful, who's angry, who, if you don't do certain things, if you don't pray the right prayer, you're going to hell. And so there was all this hell hanging over you if you didn't follow the rules, or, and they would talk about freedom, but there was always this, and the unconditional love of God. I always loved that. Like, the unconditional love of God is, you can have that as long as you meet these conditions. And so I couldn't, that view of God became so different from my view of God at that point, where God is loving, God is going to save everyone, God has a purpose for one, God is sovereign, He's written our stories, and it's not going to end disaster. So that was kind of, for me, was the big reason why I quit going to church. And then, of course, it has morphed, and there's been more and more reasons. So,
Yeah.
What was your story as far as leaving church? Or
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you and I, we come from completely different perspective, which is really great for our listeners. You said, the reason you couldn't go is to hear the preacher talk about all these things. Well, I was the preacher. So that wouldn't have been my problem, is what I heard the preacher say, because I was the one saying stuff. So sort of a different perspective. Maybe I'll just say, I was thinking about it right now, that if we probably got two different kinds of people who might be listening to our freedom journey today. And there'll be people who are in church and either struggling about it, which you just described for them. And I think, it's important to know that we're not being flippant about this. And if you're going to church, we're not trying to offend you or anything. I'm just 30 years in this freedom. You're a half a dozen years in this freedom, and it's just a freeing place to be. And but if you're going to church and you understand these truths, salvation of all, sovereignty, all, right division, we can pretty much guarantee that where you're going, you're hearing the opposite of those things. And it's very, that's a great struggle to hear these lies being said about God and lies being said about His grace and love. And, how do you go and continue that? How do you continue exposing yourself and your family to that and supporting that by your attendance, And then there's those who undoubtedly go, who know these truths. They're hoping, and those probably fall in a couple categories. And the reason I say that is because I talk to people regularly over the last 30 years who go to church. And I get to hear their struggles and their perspectives, like, why do they go? And some people go because they're looking for an opportunity to expose people to the things that they know. And they're looking forward to slipping in the salvation of all, or the sovereignty of God, or, whatever the truth is, But in reality, those opportunities are very rare, And when they do happen, it creates great havoc. Uh, and in some ways, it's almost a little sinister, to go in undercover and try to usurp the purpose of that organization that you're there for. Uh, to be honest with you, in my own mind and heart, seems a little dishonest, but just things to think about for people who are listening. And I've never known anybody sharing that particular story that's the reason they went, especially maybe like in a Sunday school class that they can interject things. I can't remember ever hear that being successful, that anybody ever got light that way. And then of course there's going to be people who are listening here who've also, as in our journey, have stopped, and so maybe will be an encouragement to you today. I haven't done it in 30, and Steve in a half a dozen years, so maybe we're to be an encouragement to you. I know another reason a lot of people go is for the social aspect, and I will give church this. They appear to be pretty good at the socialization, and gives people a chance to associate with each other. So there is a social outlet there, but it comes at a pretty high price. You've got to give up your freedom. You've got to mute yourself and not talk and not be honest and transparent about what you believe. And then you've got to be put under bondage of some kind. The bondage to show up all the time, the bondage to pay up. Again, the bondage to shut up. So the socialization aspect of it, and even the humanitarian aspect that, okay, we got good causes. Our church, financially supports this, that, and the other. And I suggest to us there's perhaps better ways to find social interaction and better ways to contribute and support causes. But now you ask me about my journey. So for about 10 years prior to quitting church, I had been on this journey, pretty intense, as a pastor, learning about the grace of God. Unconditional grace of God. I had been learning about the love of God, unconditional. And just like you said, Steve, when you go and you hear about the grace of God and you hear unmerited, you hear about the unconditional love of God, and yet there's such inconsistency in its presentation. At one moment, grace is unconditional and, unmerited. And then maybe in a few sentences later, or at least the next sermon or lesson, boy, there sounds like you got to merit it. Or that God's love is unconditional, but it sure sounds like there is a lot of conditions to get it. And so as a teacher and a preacher and a pastor, for about a course of a decade, I saw this inconsistency in my message. And I sought very diligently to clean up my message so that I wasn't adding conditions and that I wasn't adding merit to this, and attempting to teach grace as clearly as I could, and to teach God's love as clearly as I could and precisely. And the deeper I dug, the more it seemed to me a greater conflict I had, that my message didn't seem to match my practice and my organization that was the church that I pastored and founded. And especially when it came to the whole idea of church itself. Progressively over that period of a decade, I came to understand what the church, that would have been the word in my King James Bible, what the church was and what it wasn't. And as I began to understand what it was and what it wasn't from my reading and studying of the scriptures, and I began to teach it as plainly as I could. The church is not a building. The church is not a meeting. The church is not a denomination. I began to teach what the church wasn't based on the verses in the scriptures. And then I began to teach what the scriptures teach the church was. And I began to teach we are the church. It's not some place we go. It's not something we do. It's not something we participate in. It's who we are. And in that decade, as I began to more clearly and more accurately define what the church was and wasn't, I began to realize that I was living a lie. I was saying we are the church, and we had a building still that was named the church. At that point, it was called the Grace Bible Church. That denied what its name was outside. That bothered me. I taught that the church wasn't a meeting, and yet people were still coming to church. And I'm telling them they're not. This building's not the church. Our organization isn't the church. Our fellowship isn't church. And we were still doing all that. It became increasingly impossible in my heart and conscience to pretend like I wasn't involved in the very thing I taught against. And the fact was, and people who've listened to me over the years probably heard me say this, I finally came to the realization that God had a church and I had one. And he had members in his church and I had members in mine. And that he had a doctrinal statement, the scriptures, and I had one, a creed. And I'm just remembering how heavy that was. And that I was in competition, a religious competition with God and his truth. And Saturday evening became this gut-wrenching experience for me where I felt like a fake. I was doing my very best to teach as plainly as I could the opposite of what I was doing. And Sunday morning, no matter how much I took the teaching time to teach the truth as clearly as possible, it felt fake. And for a number of months before I resigned, I knew that I couldn't do this anymore. So I didn't just quit church, by the way. I really quit my life. I quit my vocation. I not only just stopped going, I resigned from being a pastor. That's all I knew my whole life. I was born and raised in church. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, all the stuff in between. That's all I knew. What drove me to be a pastor was that I loved God. I wanted to serve him. I wanted to honor him. I wanted to spend my life doing something that I thought was worthwhile and meaningful. I loved the scriptures. I loved to study the scriptures. I loved to pursue the truth. All of that which drove me to attend faithfully and to do everything the church did, and then to eventually start my own church and pastor it. The very things that motivated and moved me to do that led me away from all that. So that's my journey. And I think both our journeys, you being in the pew and me being in the pulpit, and, hopefully can resonate with people. Number one, who are listening, to our freedom journey and saying, wow, that's my story. I'm also out. Or maybe it's people saying, wow, that's my story and I'm still in, And the wonderful thing is God wrote your story. Even God wrote my story. And God wrote the story to our listeners, So this freedom journey is not about bondage and we're not trying to put anybody in bondage or condemnation. We're just talking about how we're enjoying freedom outside the building, outside the meeting, outside the denomination, outside the creed. And we're just enjoying the wide open spaces of God.
Well, one thing the word you used is fake. What you were teaching felt fake. And again, back to perspective of us folks who were in the pews, so much felt fake. Like the social aspect you talked about. Well, it's all fine and good until you decide to say something different or believe something different. Or you decide, well, maybe I'm going to do something different. You're out of that social circle and like that.
And then you find out it's not really about fellowship.
No.
It's about conformity.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that social family, church family thing is fake. And part of that is all the burden they put on you. You have to go to church. You have to be involved. You have to go to church cleaning. You have to do this. You have to be on committees. And all that takes time away from family and from other things that are and so it screws up our priorities.
Yeah.
And so that we feel like we're doing something more important. And so that's fake.
Yes, it is. And that's a part of my process in all this. And the way I struggled with this before God, I clearly had verses in the scriptures that told me I was supposed to provide for my family. Scriptures are very clear. Any man who doesn't provide for his family denied the faith, worse than infidel. Provide for my family. To love my wife. Husbands, love your wives. Parental. I can find those verses. I couldn't find any verse told me to go to church. I couldn't find any verse that told me to hold to human creeds. I couldn't find any verses about pews and buildings and pulpits. Couldn't find any verses about choir practice. I couldn't find all these things. And and so I freed myself from human structure to focus on what I did have verses for. Being a husband, being a father, providing for my family. And you're so right. I was thinking about it this morning. People work 5 or 6 days a week. Some of them work lots of overtime hours. Some people work second jobs. And then they finally get a day off. And religion ropes them in and steals valuable family time, valuable rest time. So this is a freedom of our time. It's a freedom from wearing a mask. Not only does the preacher wear a mask, but the people in the pews wear one. I mean, it's a common thing that people laugh about is the arguments that husbands and wives have on their way to church, and then they put on the mask when they go in. Yeah. So we're free from wearing a mask, whether we're in the clergy or in the pew. We're free from pretending like we hold the creed with everybody else. No two people believe anything the same if they're serious students. It's just conformity. So we have freedom of our time. We have freedom from wearing masks. We have freedom from being manipulated into certain doctrinal positions. Here's another big one too. If you go to church, you're going to get roped into a monetary bondage, something called the tithe, which has nothing to do with today. And the tithe belonged to Israel. Israel was, never forget it, Israel was a nation, and it was their taxation. It was a national and ecclesiastical taxation for the support of the temple and the priesthood and the nation. This whole stealing Israel's tithe and then creating a man-made organization and a man-made building and denomination and clergy that needs financial support, and then roping in the tithe from the Old Testament to do that is one of the greatest cons.
And it uses fear to support that.
Yes.
If you don't give, God's not going to bless you. You're stealing from God.
Yeah.
And
and you know what? I love that. Yeah. Because the tithe belongs to the Lord, but nobody giving it to the Lord.
No.
They're giving it to the local organization.
I have a friend who's he probably doesn't even call himself a Christian, but his girlfriend roped him in going to a Sunday or a Christmas Eve service. And they were asking for money so that Jesus could, I don't know, it was something about building a new building or all of that. And his name's Todd. Todd goes, well, Jesus can get his own money if he wants it. Why does he need my money? And
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
there's somebody thinking.
Yeah. If he's all powerful and all this, why is he the $20 I'm going to give him isn't going to amount to much?
Yes. Yes.
But that another thing, if you have something to finish up on that, I was going to. Another thing that's a fake is this false sense of security.
Yes.
And we talked about earlier, and it'll be on another video, that Jesus is our guardian.
Yes.
But we turn that over to the church and to pastors and to committees and to the social life. And it's a fake sense.
Yeah.
And that's why people, I think, and from my experience, and I've seen other people, that we submit to all this stuff.
Yeah.
Because we think it'll make us secure.
And our accountability partners.
Oh, my.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, my. Oh, yeah. And, and it's just, so this church, the whole concept, and I had set out 5 years before this decade of really growth and grace and truth. I had started out 5 years before that, starting my own church, because I couldn't seem to find or locate what I thought was a church that was doing anything that looked like the scripture. So I thought, I will do this. I'll make a church that's a good Bible church. And I realized the utter failure of the entire system. It was a con. It was a fraud. And yes, so with all its power structure and all of its, Yeah, all of its bondage. And I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong before I started my church, and I thought I was going to fix it. And where the light began to dawn in is the Greek word that gets translated church. Now, in a minute, we're going to tell something that's might be shocking and maybe hardly anyone's ever heard about. So hang in here for a minute. So this Greek word for church is ecclesia. In fact, we have the literal translation of the concordant, instead of translating it by the English word church, just simply transliterates it and puts ecclesia in the text. But it's a compound word. Ek is the first part of the Greek word. Ek means out. The second part of the Greek word is klesia, which means called. So the word simply means called out. Not a building, not a meeting, not a denomination, nor an organization. It's a out calling. It's a call of God outside of society, outside of organizations, outside of religion, outside of all the structures. God is calling people that he designated beforehand, people that were called and chosen in God's plan before the disruption of the world. It's not something you invite people to. I'm going to invite you to my church. My church. You're going to invite me to your church. No, this is all divine. It's the outcalled. We are the outcalled. And when we get that, not somewhere to go, not something to do, not something that we're inviting people to. And God's not even inviting anyone into this. They have a divine calling, a divine destination, predestinated, predesignated. So where does church come in? Well, church, the English word church predates the English translation of scriptures. Churches were already in place before English versions ever got translated. These organizations, these religious structures and organizations were already in place. And how clever of the religious institutions to put themselves in the Bible by translation. They put their doctrine in the Bible, hell, eternal and everlasting. They put their doctrine in the Bible. They put their organization, their religion in the Bible, church. Interesting, this word church. The Old English, the root of that word is kirk. K-I-R-K, kirk. You know what other English word comes from the exact same root as kirk? Circus. Circus and church have the exact same English root. And you know what religion is? It's a circus. And the whole idea of circus is, as you might be able to hear, it's a circle. And the circus is in a circle because a performance is going on, entertainment's going on. And in fact, that's exactly why the English word kirk was in use for the religious organization, because they met in a circle where a performance happened. it's a circus. I submit to you, it's a three-ring circus. And it's all about entertainment. And it's all about, and what's that, and what drives that entertainment? Why do you have a circus? It's a money-making operation. Yeah, we're going to be running. We'll be running in a future issue of the Bible Students Notebook. We're going to be running historical information about the etymology of the English word church, and the historical nature of how we got to where we are today. Because the thing that bothered me as a young man, and then as I became a pastor, and up until the time I resigned, was trying to find anything that looked like my church that I grew up in, to try to find anything that looked like that anywhere in the scriptures. I encourage you, if you're still going to church and you think it's something that God ordained, I encourage you to go to the Bible and look for anything that looks like your church.
A lot of folks, and you hear this when people start a new church, they want to be like the church in Acts.
Yeah.
And so this is an Acts church, we're gathered together. Yeah. And so talk a little bit about what's happened in Acts.
Yeah.
And the transition to where we are today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no doubt. People are trying to get back to the scriptures, back to the book of Acts. That's what I did. I'm so like, we're going to go back to the New Testament church. Of course, the New Testament's a covenant God made with Israel, the new covenant. But anyway, yes. And so the next thing, beyond seeing what this word is in the Greek, outcalled to what? And then when we come to understand this pinnacle of Paul's revelation in Ephesians and Colossians, the administration of the secret administration, and we realize that God has a unique calling here. Now, God had a previous calling in the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, you actually had local synagogues where the scriptures were being studied and taught. And as Paul began his ministry, he always go to the Jew first, and he go to the synagogue first in every city, and he began to expound the scriptures. So that the church, the structure, the meeting, the activity in the book of Acts was centered at the synagogue. And if the synagogue got too disruptive and expelled them, then they would meet in somebody's house, which is where I went in my one of the transitions I tried to make was after I resigned the pastorate was I tried to somehow I thought this just had to the meeting had to be happen. So I just I traded one architectural design for another. I traded my church building for my house and the house of other people because I had seen that supposedly in the book of Acts. So what we have in the book of Acts is we have local assemblies that had leadership, apostles and prophets and evangelists and pastors and teachers at local assemblies. And in the book of Acts and in Paul's early epistles, there were multiple called out people. And there was the called out at Corinth. There was the called out in Galatia. There's the called out in Thessalonica. And church is in the plural because there's multiple. So the church of the Acts period was local. It had a hierarchy of supernatural gifts. It had a structure, a meeting, no doubt. It had all of that. Then when we get to the secret administration, instead of talking about churches in the plural, called out ones plurally by geography. We move to a universal church in the singular, ecclesia instead of church, in the singular. And today, under the secret administration, under the secret hidden God, we traded multiple ecclesias for one ecclesia. We traded locality for universality. We traded the headship, the leadership of apostles, prophets, evangelists, and pastors and teachers, and we traded it for a single head, the Lord Jesus Christ. So we have a completely different structure. And so those who want to go to church and they want a pastor and they want to do all the things associated with local churches, they are trying to participate in a system that is rooted in the book of Acts and into the Old Testament, with a temple, with a building, with a tithe, with a priesthood, with a clergy, and a laity. It's not that that stuff's not there. That stuff is in the scriptures, but it all relates to Israel, and God's dealing with Israel. And now today, it's the one new man, the one new humanity. Not just the multiplicity of churches, but the single ecclesia, the single called out, to which we all belong and to which we are all members, members of the Christ. And when you see these truths, you then really truly see everything we talked about beforehand, Steve. You know, the bondage of time, the bondage of masks, the bondage of conformity, the bondage, monetary bondage. All those are in many ways side benefits from the real freedom to be who we really are, to be this called out. And where are we called out into? The Christ. And we are one with him inseparably. He is our head and we are his members. And he is seated at the right hand of the Father in the super celestial, in the super heavens. And one day when he is manifest to creation, who he really is and where he's really at, we're going to be manifest right there with him in glory. This is the beauty of the ecclesia, of the secret administration. And this is where true freedom is. This is where true fellowship is. This is where true life is. This is where true service is. It's all in being who we are in God's present purpose. Here's the big reaction people have. And maybe we should address it for a minute. Is this issue of fellowship. Being the outcalled is very, very lonely by design. For those of us who grew up going to church, very social. You're a part of something local, something tangible. And where this leads us is away from that. We're called out of that. And invariably, people want to know, well, now where do I go to church? I feel so alone. I think people watch these, by the way, and we have people watching, our videos and reading our material from all over the world. And we have people always reaching out to us. And they think that they think we have a church and that we have a fellowship and that we have a meeting and that we have an organization and a denomination. I think they think that, I just got a call the other day and someone was saying, hey, oh my goodness, I'm just getting into this and I need to know, what your denomination is and where your churches are and, where you're meeting at. And I need to know all this stuff. And I understand. But a lot of people feel like they're getting cheated and that they're alone. And they read the BSN maybe or watch these videos and they think we're having church in the religious sense and they're missing out. I can't find a place, they say. What do you do? I can't find a place. They think we found one. Or that we're starting one, yeah. And the thing is, no, And the thing is, God's calling has always been alone. It says about Abraham that God called him alone. The calling of God is solitary. Now, thank God we can find each other, but there's very few examples of anybody I know who has somebody in their area. The only people here anywhere near me is just my family. Now Dean and Chris, they got each other. That's awesome. I'm going to say that, that two people found each other and they didn't find each other. God wrote that, but it's the exception. We're all way apart from each other. And so we just need to understand who we are. And this is the course. And it's normal. It's normal to be alone. It's normal. And if you grew up in church, it's normal to miss that. It's normal to miss the fellowship. Oh, can I say one other thing that we're freed from in this truth? Is we're freed from the emotional, sentimental manipulation that happens in church. It feels good to go to church. It feels the music is moving and feels good. It's interesting what Paul said about in the secret administration, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. This all feels good. And the way church is presented, I'm so glad to be here today and get my battery charged. I'm here to get my battery charged. And sometimes just a weekly, going weekly is not enough. So you got to have revival to get your battery charged. And this is a false system of sentimentality. I go to church where my family's gone. My parents went here. My grandparents, they helped found the church. It's based on sentimentality, emotional. So we get charged so we can go back on Monday. And that's a whole false system of what spiritual life is about. It's a false, deceptive system about what spiritual growth is. Spiritual growth is alone, it's quiet, it's calm, it's steady, it's not this. And now I got to go get charged. And so there's a freedom. Freedom from emotional manipulation. freedom from sentimental manipulation. Someone told me some time back, that they just had to keep going to church because of the hymns. They just needed to sing the hymns with people. And what can you say? you know, but it's good to be free from that. And what it does, it reinforces this kind of life. And where God's, and you and I talk about this in the edifice book, where God's taken the believer is not some place where they need their batteries charged. It's not some place where they need a shot of something like you do when you're an addict. I got to get my dose. I got to get another fix. It's a religious fix. He brings us to a place. Father is growing us into a place of stability. He's bringing us into a place where we have an edifice build up that's steady and sure. And as Paul would say, and none of these things move me. Nothing's moving me. I have a foundation. I have an edifice. And I'm unmovable. And that's because it's the work of God in us. And free from that. Hey, I'm free from church squabbles and fights and divisions. Church splits. I'm free from moving beyond the church I'm a member of, trying to find a new one.